My life, my way. You gotta dig deep in order to blossom. My Life, My Way, the paperback, can be obtained from Lulu Online Publishing and Amazon. Introduction. The heart has reasons that reason does not understand. Blaise Pascal. Over time and with self-effort, reality has proven itself to me to be a fluid thing, and we waste our time if we dwell on injustice. Taking the reins in our own hands and using what we have at any given moment in time, we can change things for the better. Don't be afraid of letting a horror story or two from the past emerge if needs be. Feel the feelings associated with it and release them. For in that way, it no longer makes a negative imprint on your life. Things can't help but change, and we change things for the better when we cease blaming and claim our ability to respond to life's challenges in a way that allows us to move in the direction we want to go in authenticity. And we realize that nothing, absolutely nothing, stops us. Chapter 1. Many things in your life matter, but only one thing matters absolutely. It matters whether you succeed or fail in the eyes of the world. It matters whether you are healthy or not healthy, whether you are educated or not educated. It matters whether you are rich or poor. It certainly makes a difference in your life. Yes, all these things matter relatively speaking, but they don't matter absolutely. There is something that matters more than any of those things, and that is finding the essence of who you are beyond that short-lived entity, that short-lived personalized sense of self. You find peace not by rearranging the circumstances of your life, but by realizing who you are at the deepest level. Eckhart Tolle, author of Stillness Speaks. This is a story of how I learned about who I am at my deepest level. Where it all began. I was a compulsive eater throughout my teenage years. What had started innocently as a diet at the age of 13 insidiously developed into a set pattern of binge eating and bulimia by the time I was 18. That's when I found the book Fat is a Feminist Issue, and my life began to change. I practiced what it preached. I became more and more aware of my feelings as I overcame my habit of eating compulsively. And through my increased awareness of my feelings, a stronger sense of self emerged. This stronger sense of self, along with relief, became the major gifts of eventually being free of the curse of compulsive eating. I feel it was also thanks to that stronger sense of self that I left my family home at the age of 19. This stronger connectedness to the real me, as it were, gave me the courage and ability I needed to leave the familiar comforts and security of the known and venture into the unknown. And as the years progressed, I was to discover that this venturing into the unknown was to become a theme every now and then in my life. And here it was, my starting point, this recognizing of a sense of self that had its foundations firmly laid in my feelings and my wishes, as opposed to an imposed sense of self that came from what tradition and my family felt and wished for me and from me. I was only beginning to catch a glimpse of the inner knowingness that would be my guide throughout my life. As I grew away from the known and into the unknown, and beyond that into the mystical, esoteric, and downright wondrous. So at 19, one evening after work, I felt the urge to binge coming on, and I did what I had learned to do to counteract that compulsion to eat when full. I checked in with my feelings. I was restless, and I felt aware of my father sitting by the fire at the back corner of the room where he usually sat. Yet For some unknown reason, I started to become aware of what I could only describe as negative vibes that seemed to emanate from him. Years later, I now know that through my increased awareness, I had simply become more sensitive to his energy, his aura, if you like, and realized how negative it actually was. I had vaguely recognized that he was a pessimist. Like many an Irish farmer, most of the time he did not say that much at all, and he did not pay much attention to his children, grown or otherwise. He was a critic, and I had grown up thinking that if he was silent, then everything was okay. Through familiarity, how unacknowledged is the pain of being ignored and the lack of positive communication. But suddenly I felt that even what was silently emanating from him was harmful to me, and that had also gone unacknowledged. Did it go unacknowledged by both my family and myself because we were not even aware of it? My binge eating had suppressed that uncomfortable truth along with uncomfortable and painful feelings. Binge eating is well known for its ability to enable one to hide from and hence avoid feeling and facing all that the uncomfortable truth implies. And when I stopped binge eating, I became aware not only of my feelings, but also I became more aware of my family's dysfunctional dynamics. Now, what was I going to do with this newfound information and this newfound awareness about my family and my surroundings? The answer to that question turned out to be part of an unfolding story, my life story. And so, as I sat there feeling the urge to binge subside, I probed deeper into my feelings by asking myself, given the fact I feel this way, what would I like to do now? The answer came: leave home. It felt right and appropriate to me, but to call it unconventional would have been the understatement of the year. For in 1984, a 19-year-old farmer's daughter in Ireland did not just up and leave home unless doing so with her new husband. Colm, my then beau of several years, and I were not concerned about getting married and the ensuing obstacle course that would have involved. So the barrage of how, why, when, and where arose within my unconventional thinking. I talked it over with Colm and we decided to start flat hunting. When Colm found a scruffy little two-bedroom ground floor flat wedged in between a bookie's office and a grocery store, all owned by the landlord, we moved in, living together. A radical act, to be sure. He had inquired about the flat and looked it over on his own and told the landlord he would be renting it with a friend. Colm had been Colm had had enough sense to say friend and not girlfriend, for that would have surely led to a closed door. Once we moved in, and the landlord saw that the friend was actually me, a well spoken, pretty little blonde 19-year-old, he, somewhat bemused, said nothing, as he was happy to have the rent paid regularly, and after all, the horse had already bolted. For then I was a rule breaker. We both were. In 1984, to Ireland's rural communities, living together was not an option for any young man or woman, not if they wanted to be deemed respectable anyhow. Luckily, respect from our communities and staying within convention's parameters was not so important to us. We would do as we wished and as we could. We were both, in our own ways, determined to follow the still small voice within, even though we had hardly ever heard the phrase, much less ever pondered its mystical meaning. We did know, however, that we had no qualms about ignoring convention or tradition if it did not happen to be in alignment with what others would say to be rebellious, our inner wants and wishes. And to be of different religions? Whew, well, that was so far off the convention chart as to be bordering on the inconceivable. Maybe that's why we got away with it, extracting more than a few chuckles from the locals who couldn't help but be quite amazed at the simplicity of it all. A pity it didn't make the news. I could see the headlines: Protestant and Catholic shack up together. Make love, not war, was the beautifully blatant message our actions exuded to anyone who noticed, or knew, or cared. Real life can be quite amazing when we look deeply enough or have the right perspective. So, on a dark November night, we took a taxi from town to the big old farmhouse that had been my home for 19 years and parked outside the front door, which we used as a back door. I scurried upstairs, past my mother and father sitting intent on ignoring me in the living room, and brought down my belongings, mainly clothes, in a suitcase and a black bag. Colm sat with the taxi driver and later commented that the taxi driver had said, "Are you two eloping?" Something like that was Colm's reply. And so, a new identity for me by the benevolent unseen forces of fate was being forged. I had just hopped out of a pigeonhole and checked into a plush little hotel called individualism. I had taken my destiny into my own inexperienced yet loving hands. Over the next few weeks of us living together, I felt as if I was definitely going against the grain. My actions were going against the unspoken current of society, and they were perfectly legal and going with the flow of my own life. Maybe it was because of this we did not meet with much opposition. Even despite this lack of opposition, never have I been more aware of the fact that what I wanted and did was very different to what others wanted and did. Like a salmon swimming upstream, a deeper instinct had just taken over and was now directing my actions. However, as it turned out, over the following years, thousands of young Irish couples, both of the same and different religions, would start doing the same thing, i.e., living together, thus forging a new alternative for the youth of Ireland, the possibility of living together as opposed to marrying under the church. We had simply been, I am proud to say, one of the first. Before we lived together, when we were still going out for a while, we found ourselves drawn to the old people's pubs, as we would call them. By this, we meant pubs frequented by married couples, mainly over the age of 50. We would watch the couples in their 60s or 70s dance 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3 to an old time waltz emanating from a homespun country and western band or solo artist in one corner of an upstairs pub function room. Maybe it was the harmony that touched us. There was a tremendous grace to these people, a quiet acceptance of the years they had spent together and the children they had raised, and now the enjoyment of good friends and a night out, willing to live, willing to dance, willing to hold each other again after a lifetime of holding. Colm and I marvelled at and wondered what it was that attracted us to be part of that scene. When he was a 20-year-old punk rocker and I something of a hippie type. I believe now that we knew instinctively that in being there, we could in some way meld into the scene and be that old married couple spending their latter years together, for we may not do so in real life. I am glad we grew old together in that way. It was beautiful. Thus our communities were wondrous, deep and rich in so many ways. We partook of them, and they fed us as best they could, but not for us two, the conventional route. End of chapter 1. My Life, My Way. Available from Amazon.